All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to this month's Them Conversations, and it's a big honor for us to be hosting once again Rabbi Siegel, who is not an unfamiliar face to our community, having at least visited at least once a year in the time that I've been in St. And very much a great charismatic speaker. He's spoken within our community on a number of occasions, and a mentor to so many within the community. So it's a big honor to have him here, albeit on a slightly different track to what he's ordinarily accustomed to. But really, Rabbi Siegel, when I made contact with him earlier, when it was towards the end of late last year, and I said, this is what we're doing in our community. We are trying to expose our community to different groups from both within and beyond the Jewish community, and try to hear their perspectives and what's in their lives, and try to open up their world to us. Since it was a WhatsApp conversation, I can't say whether you did or didn't hesitate, but it didn't seem like there was any hesitation on his part. So thank you, Rabbi Siegel, for agreeing to be here this evening and be part of our conversation. For those who are not familiar with this format, the title of this whole series has been Them. And the idea is that these are groups. We want to meet groups of people who ordinarily we don't have day-to-day interaction with or know very much about their world. But even though we might be quite ignorant of the world, we all have very, very firm positions and feelings about their world. And I think in the proliferation of the Netflix series Shtisel has opened up to many, I see the heads here, so has opened up the Charedi world to many in a positive way, where before virtually every cinematic portrayal of the Charedi community has been very negative. And the purpose of this evening is just to touch upon a couple of the very topical issues that have been very topical issues in Israel in particular, but to a certain degree in the diaspora as well. And just to try and see, what's happening and understand the logic and the perspective from the Charedi community therein. So, Rabbi Siegel, welcome. So perhaps just by way of introduction, if you could first and foremost just give us a little bit about your background, where you come from and where you're at, and then perhaps, just so that we're all on the same page, define what the word Charedi means in your world.
Great. So first of all, thanks for the opportunity. Actually didn't hesitate when I got the option from Rabbi Krebs to come here and say, discuss these ideas, because I have a deep respect and love of the community, and every experience I've had here has been so open and engaging. And I thought, well, this is going to be a challenge, because it's definitely a different platform to the one I'm normally at. As you can see, I came in full battle gear, presenting very well. So I was very excited by the opportunity. And actually what happened is as follows. Since the initial conversation we had over WhatsApp, it actually got me thinking, and I started to think, well, let me look at this world that I've grown up in a certain way, and think how it expresses to an audience that doesn't have that same kind of exposure. So maybe I will begin with a bit of background. I've actually brought a specimen from my past, Salman, a good friend in the background. So we grew up together in traditional South African background, King David School, and I think I had more of a bent towards religion, using the word bent quite loosely, but I never was really exposed to any kind of real Torah education until I entered into university. And what happened was, when I was in second year university, pursuing perhaps what many parents were happy. Most parents, when their children take a course away from their university degrees and decide to spend time in yeshiva, it creates a lot of anxiety, like what's going to happen with their livelihood. But thankfully, I was doing a degree in fine arts, and my parents were relieved that now I'd be doing something more productive with my time. So what happens is I get more and more inspired about Judaism, which is its own story, how it happened and why it happened. And I decided, okay, I have to go to Israel, I have to learn, I have to pursue this. And I land up in Jerusalem, in a yeshiva called Or Samach, and I land with this massive bang, because I've never actually been exposed to any of this before in my life. South Africa was a relatively generic community with very little diversity. For example, there was no Hasidim, there was no real Charedi presence in the classical sense of the word, and therefore it was bewildering to me. I didn't really know where to put myself. And that, especially, I was 20 and I had about the emotional age of 70, which over the last decade too has like gone up a couple of years, only a couple. And so it was very difficult for me. I just didn't really have mechanisms of processing this, and it's been an ongoing process. So as a result, that was 30 years ago. So 30 years ago I landed in Israel, and I've lived there ever since. And I've lived essentially, even though perhaps you could argue that the first month and perhaps a year and a bit of my experience in Israel was not officially Charedi, because Or Samach is a yeshiva which is pretty much open-agendaed and just is there to teach Torah, but still I gravitated towards a Charedi direction, and after just under 2 years in Or Samach, I went to the heart of a Charedi neighborhood called Mattersdorf. Not quite Stieseldick, but pretty close. And I was in yeshiva which was known as Lakewood East, and I spent a couple of years there, and then I went on to a yeshiva called the Mir Yeshiva, and spent a few more years there, and then 20 years ago I began teaching. So I've been pretty much involved in the Charedi world. We got married 27 years ago, it's been fun. And since then we've lived in the heart of an Israeli Charedi neighborhood called Ramot Dalet, which means the entire population of the neighborhood, I'm not quite sure about the numbers, but it's a few thousand, it's a very kind of monolithic group. And when I say the word monolithic, it's quite literal, only two kinds. And so I've been living there for the last 27 years. So what I'd like to perhaps share with you today is, in terms of the currents in the Charedi world and the facts and figures, I can't say that I'm okay with those. My intention over here is to give you perhaps an insider's view of, well, how does it feel when my neighbors are Charedi? How do those interactions work? What happens when you go to shul? What does it feel like on Pesach? What are people saying about when their kid does or doesn't go to the army? How do people feel on Yom Ha'atzmaut? And instead of approaching it from the macro, I'll perhaps approach it from the micro, which is a more personal and not necessarily reflective, but hopefully will be valuable for you to get insight. And if this doesn't work, please come visit me in Israel and have the live tour.
So perhaps you could, in your own words, describe what the word Charedi, when you say, I'm Charedi, what do you mean by that? Because just despite, within the Charedi world, you've got everything from, let's say, the very harsh, Satmar, anti-Israel, anti-Zionist in every sense of the word, to the more, let's call it the Charedi Leumi, which is, on a surface level, would look Charedi, but they're very Zionistic in certain aspects of their, and then you would have, I suppose, the vast majority, which is this, let's call it a-Zionistic Charedi, which is supportive, so to speak, of the state and the concept of the state, but not necessarily actively contributing on things like the army or Shirut Leumi and the like. So since that whole spectrum would fall under the umbrella of the Charedi world in some form or another, and I don't want people to have an assumption that, oh, you're Charedi, therefore you must be anti-Zionist and you burn the Israeli flag. So we could to some degree get an appreciation of where you see yourself in that world.
Okay, that's a great question. So actually the phrase, I don't know if any of you know, there's a group of Christians called the Quakers. So actually, they're the Charedim of the Christian world. Not that I know what they subscribe to, but the actual word Charedi means Quaker. So there you go, first new thing you learned tonight. Next time you eat those oats, remember, those are Charedi oats. So the word Charedi comes from Quaker. It's actually derived from a pasuk in Isaiah. And the pasuk is two pasukim in Isaiah, but one of them is Charedim al Dvar Hashem, which means those that tremble for the word of Hashem. And it connotes a sense of awe, reverence for divinity. In other words, Charedi, the term, has a certain connotation of people that take this whole thing called Torah exceptionally seriously. Now, within that general umbrella terminology, as Rabbi Krebs pointed out, there is a massive diversity. If we can, I mean, he started from a scale of anti-Zionist to pro-Zionist, but there's actually many ways you could categorize him. You could categorize them in terms of approaches to working and learning, which actually, to a large degree, will split. Let me maybe begin by making three fundamental distinctions within the Charedi world, which I think are larger categories, and then obviously there'll be subcategories and more subcategories. The three major distinctions in the Charedi world are the Hasidim, what we refer to as the Lithuanian Yeshiva Jews, or Litvisha or Litaim, and the Sephardim. Now, all of those groups will traditionally, in terms of if you want to identify them by dress, they all definitely wear the penguin suit, but the sizes differ. Not the people's body sizes. Those obviously differ. The sizes of the length of the clothes, etc. So fundamentally, you've got the Hasidim, the Litvaks, and the Sephardim. Now, there is immense difference in terms of, for example, let's talk about the attitude towards going into the workforce. So in the Hasidic world, there is no really notion of a person spending extended amount of years after they're married in a kollel type situation. And the Hasidic groups encourage their followers to go out and work. Oh, sorry. So maybe to give you a bit of a background in terms of the differentiation between yeshiva and kollel. Yeshiva is a institution, academy of Talmudic study. The primary focus is on the study of Talmud, and Talmud being a very complex exploration of the fundamentals of Jewish law in all its aspects and permutations. And that specifically refers to unmarried students. When a student gets married, so then he graduates what's called a kollel. A kollel is sometimes a similar kind of curriculum, but specifically suited for married students, in as much as the daily schedule will look different. The daily schedule of Yeshiva essentially has got three components to it, which I suppose is an interesting insight in terms of the study culture within the Charedi world. As opposed to, say, university or school, the yeshiva system is divided up into three parts: the morning, the afternoon, and the night. Which means from, you started with davening at approximately 7:30. The morning, what's called the morning seder, the morning schedule starts at approximately between 9:15 and 9:30, and stretches until 1:15. There's mincha. There's a big break from 1:30 for lunch and recreation until 3:30. It then goes from 3:30 till 7. A break for supper and Ma'ariv, and then from 8:30 till 10:30, 11, 12, depending on the person's diligence. So it's a pretty all-encompassing day. That's for unmarried students, where they can sustain that schedule. For married students, the schedule shifts. They have a family and a wife and family to take care of, so therefore their primary learning period is only during the day. They learn only 2 of the 3 Sedarim. Now, that kind of process of learning yeshiva, get married, and then stay in kollel for an extended period of time, which means that the kollel will actually pay your stipend. It's not a lot of money, but if the husband goes into the kollel and the wife is also she's also employed and she's getting some kind of remuneration from her job, so then it's enough to kind of stretch out those years of learning, depending on the nature of the frugal circumstances of the couples living, to an extended amount of years. Within the Lithuanian community, there is a high value placed on doing that for pretty much as long as you can. In the Hasidic community, the attitude is, you learned in yeshiva, you're married now, maybe you'll spend a year or 2 afterwards, because take into consideration that the age of marriage within the Charedi world for girls is a little bit younger than boys, but the average marriage age is between, for girls, let's say 18 to 22, and for boys probably 20 to 24. Obviously there are people who get married before and after, but that's the kind of the major focus. So people are quite young when they get married, especially the Hasidim tend to get married a little bit younger. So they'll spend a couple of years in kollel, kind of brushing up and building a foundation to their learning, and then they'll be merged into the workforce. In the Sephardi world, it's much more complex. because they came from a very different place. So both the Lita'im and the Hasidim essentially both came from Eastern Europe, and their sources and their traditions follow that kind of spirit. The Sephardim came from a very different place, and they came in late into the game, because they were entered into Israel when a lot of the yeshivot were pre-established. So they actually took on the dress. So even though Sephardim back in Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, were not walking around in black suits and hats, once they came to Israel and they began to subscribe to the Charedi life, they also put on the garb. So they also dressed the same way, but internally their customs are vastly different, and there's actually a lot of diversity in terms of the attitude towards working and learning. And it's much harder to categorize as opposed to the Hasidic and the Litvic world. Is that...
So where do you see yourself?
Oh, so where am I? It's a question I ask myself. You know, sometimes I say, hey man, I'm just like a chiller, but I don't think that's going to help for tonight. Where I see myself is, I would associate with the Lithuanian Yeshiva world. That's the kind of institutions that my children have gone to school in. My grandchildren are presently in schooling. And I suppose that's a place where I would be, you know, I actually have a problem identifying with large communities, but if I would put myself in some situation, some place, that's probably where I would place myself.
So, I suppose the two big questions that I'd like to focus on this evening is one regarding the state of Israel and the approach from yourself and your world to not only the concept of the state of Israel in general as a secular Israeli state, Jewish state, but one's contribution. So one of the biggest attacks and the biggest criticisms of the Charedi community is non-service within the army. I think on the one level is non-service in the army, second level is non-service in any national structured service, any form of national service. And I'll take it a step further, a feeling by many within the army that it's not only that they're not served, but they're looked down upon because they serve in the army. And so perhaps, just if someone to come to you and say, you don't serve in the army, you live in this country, you benefit from the security of the country, the safety that you can study in yeshiva, and you can raise your kids in this country and use all the benefits of the country, but yet you don't contribute to it. So how does that sit with you, and how would you respond to that?
Okay, so that's a great question. I think that's probably one of the sorest and most core issues. And I mean, I completely understand it, because it's an issue which touches both on national security, but it's even more poignant and painful because people lose their lives. So it's a very emotionally charged issue. Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, snaky. So when you think about that, this is kind of something which really kind of, in a very sad way for me personally, rips the country apart in terms of the relationship between Charedim and let's say the secular world. And the problem is it's very hard to see a reconciliation because there's obviously a fundamental approach to values. Now, first of all, I want you to distinguish between serving in the army and appreciating the army. I think it's hard to say what the masses feel, but personally and from certainly my teachers, not serving in the army doesn't mean an appreciation of the army. Actually, the yeshiva that I studied in, the Mir Yeshiva, the previous Rosh Yeshiva, Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, he would like accuse a person of being not worthy of study if you don't have appreciation for the soldiers. And I think that would be unaware and ungrateful to acknowledge the fact that these people are literally giving up their lives, and at the very least, giving up 3 of the most precious years of their life to ensure that you're protected. And I think it requires a person who's extremely numb and unaware to not be appreciative of that. As an example, an anecdote, and I think it does reinforce this idea, during the Tzuk Eitan, the recent war in Gaza, there was a project amongst, our entire family and all their friends, and everyone, pretty much everyone in our community participated, is that every person in the community was assigned the name of a soldier. And they said, those guys are fighting, you sit and you pray. And most of the people in our community, as far as I know, in my circle for sure, all of my children, they had the name of the soldier, that they would pray, they would learn in their merit. So there is a sense, you know, at least ideally of not kind of, oh, we're here and who cares about them. Not to say that there aren't individuals who are emotionally stinted who don't feel that way, but I definitely think, from the top downwards, that's a feeling of appreciation is definitely there. The problem is there's a core value difference. And the core value difference is that the Charedi world perceives itself as, yes, contributing to the advancement of the society, Jewish people as a whole. And this is where I think it gets very complicated. Because where do you place the value of Torah study? Where does it rank in the hierarchy of importance? So within the Charedi world, I think that's probably one of the most differentiating points of it. It takes the notion of Torah study and its fundamental contribution to the existence and the continued existence of the Jewish people, and in a hierarchy of values, it puts it really right there at the top. In other words, is there anything the question would be asked, is there anything that could be done better than the study of Torah? The answer would be, no, not really. And the Talmud even gives a graphic example of this with Mordechai, the hero of the Purim story. And Mordechai, he went into Shushan, and he should have gone into Shushan, and literally saved the entire Jewish people through his strategy from extermination. He gets back to the Jewish Supreme Court, the Sanhedrin, and they say, we're very sorry, Mordechai, but you've been demoted. Because during the time that you were saving the Jewish people, you actually weren't occupied in the study of Torah, and as a result, your spiritual level has somewhat dropped. Now, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't have saved the Jewish people, obviously not, but it does mean that in what the impact that it has on the individual and the nation from this perspective is immeasurable. So once you perceive that the study of Torah is contributing, first of all, if you have the faith, from a spiritual perspective, that this is the stuff which is injecting the Jewish people with energy. This is kind of the heart that's getting the blood to course through the veins of the Jewish people as a whole. So then you'd ask a Charedi Yeshiva Bocha, why don't you contribute to the state? His answer will be, what do you mean? I'm actually doing the ultimate contribution. I'm guaranteeing the future survival of the Jewish people, granted, not on a physical level, but on a spiritual level. I mean, I once thought, and this is kind of a radical way of thinking, but I once thought, well, what would happen if, you know, the entire Israel would become Charedi, which demographically, I mean, fortunately, unfortunately, depending on the position you hold, is not a distant reality. I think by the year 2065, there's presently 1 million Charedi in Israel, which is an enormous amount. It's approximately between 1 in 7 and 1 in 8. And the average birth rate is 8 children per family. So, you know, you can never anticipate what's going to happen in the future, but based on the current statistics, so there will eventually be a majority, you know, if nothing changes, and you never know, there'll be a majority of Charedim in Israel. Which, imagine like shtisel on steroids. So you've got, that's a real thing. But just theoretically, so let's say theoretically there would be a Jewish state with no Jewish army. So predictably the state would be invaded and overrun, and the Jews would be forced into another exile. And it happened before. It's happened before twice. And they'd be flung into a diaspora. And if they stuck to the study of Torah, so just like there's been a Jewish people for the last 2,000 years, there'll be a Jewish people in 2,000 years' time. On the other hand, let's imagine if every single person who was studying Torah was just like the opposite scenario. And everyone stopped studying Torah, and now there was an army, but there was no study of Torah. So then, predictably, the Jewish people may have a physical existence, but ultimately the rate of assimilation, which is already astounding in the larger world, it's 80%, would just become, there'd be a national assimilation, and then the memory of Judaism would be a memory, and the state would be assimilated, and after a while, just like every other nation in the world, the Jews would cease to exist. So based on that, there's something very compelling about the preeminence of the study of Torah, and then we have to ask ourselves the cool question, well, does it even supersede contributing to serving the armed forces? And the Charedi community will ask, most certainly, because since this is contributing to the life force of the Jewish people in a significant manner, so therefore this is our army, and this is the army which is going to maintain the body and the structure and soul of the Jews moving forward in the future, and therefore a Jewish yeshiva student between the ages of 21, let's say, will have a heightened obligation, the same Reb Chaim Shmulevitz during the Six-Day War. Could have been the War of Independence. I think there was a War of Independence. In the Meir Shiva, he said, Bochum, if you go to sleep, you're like a good person on guard duty that's left his post. As much as the soldiers are fighting day and night, you learn day and night. So I think that's a concept which is maybe not familiar to people, and they just think it's a way of getting out of armed combat.
I think we're going to come back to this question from another angle a little bit later, but let's leave that, because the second element, which I think really defines an element within the Charedi world in general, is the lack of advanced secular education. So perhaps you could just describe for us exactly, where within the school system secular education goes, and once you follow that, it's just one of the real concerns within the Israeli society at the moment is the rampant poverty within the Charedi community and the lack of opportunity for gainful employment due to that lack of education.
Okay, good. So I think let's first of all discuss education systems, and then let's discuss value in the workforce. I think both are relevant, and both are actually rapidly changing. The educational system in the Charedi world is gender divided, which means the girls have one way of schooling system and the boys have a completely and actually quite radically different way of schooling system. The girls' schooling system is almost a carbon copy of any secular schooling system, bar the fact that in the girls' schooling system is obviously a large component of the day which is devoted to what's called Limudei Kodesh, or the study of different aspects of Jewish studies. Jewish studies, in other words, the day would be divided between Jewish studies and secular studies. There's actually within the Charedi world an incredibly strong push, as bizarre it may sound, for academic excellence amongst the girls. And I don't know if I think my family is pretty typical. Our first 4 children are all girls. My eldest daughter is an English teacher. She's seeking to do a second degree in either art therapy or teens at risk. My next daughter is a graphic artist who's a dress designer. My third daughter is finished a degree in special ed, wants to go into social work. And my fourth daughter is entering into nursing. Now, that means that their subjects range from biology, history, math, science, etc., as well as Tanakh, Chumash, Musar, etc., a whole range of topics. The boys' schooling system, however, is completely different. There's a range in terms of, in their primary school education, how much secular studies they do. Generally, English is not studied at all in yeshivas as a rule, so their basic exposure to study is primarily the secular studies that they have are maths, history, a little bit, and depending on the particular primary school, there may be other subjects thrown in. At the age of, in the girls' schools, there's like primary school education ends in the 8th grade, 9th grade is secondary education, and then after 12th grade would be tertiary. In the boys' school, it goes pretty much from grade 1 till grade 9 or 8, depending on the institution, is called Cheder, like that old familiar world, it's called Cheder. And then from approximately the age of 14 until you get married, so there's no actual finishing date, you're in what's called Yeshiva Gedola, which is, let's say, from the age of 14 till 17 you're in Yeshiva Ketana, from the age of 18 until you get married you're in what's called Yeshiva Gedola. So there's like 3 levels. Once you get to the age of 14, so then for the most part there's no longer any secular studies. And your day, like I described the day previously, is broken up into 3 parts. For the younger boys, they generally don't go till 10:30 at night. They'll be finishing at around about either 8:30 or 9:30, but essentially they're going to be spending their entire day in the study of Talmud, with a little bit of the day spent on the study of Halakha, and which is Jewish law, and a little bit of the day which is spent on ethical development. But most of the day, definitely the lion's share is engaging in only Limudei Kodesh, specifically the study of Gemara. Now, as a result, there's enormous amounts of, let's say, educational breadth that they don't have. So you can answer, well, they'll get it from their wives, but that's not so effective. Can cause child vice problems. So what do you do with this? And let's say a person wants to become gainfully employed. So now he's had, fantastic education in Torah, but he's essentially incapable of even entering into a degree and getting a qualification, which will make him like right at the bottom of the run of the job market and may generate poverty. So what's happened now, and this is like a relatively new thing, is new meaning in the last decade, is as the Charedi population becomes more of a moving force in Israeli society as a whole, so there's huge incentives, both within the Charedi world and without, to get the Charedi population, those who are going to be going into who aren't going to be staying as an extended period of learning, to go and get a job. Now the problem is, well, how do you catch up a lifetime of education and get them qualified? So the truth is, it's not that hard. I went to school, didn't learn much. So what's interesting is they have these accelerated courses where in the space it's called Mechina. In the space of a year, a person focuses on the degree that he wants to do, and he gets a preparation for that particular degree. So if it's a maths and science degree, so he'll get background maths and science. If it's law, so then he'll get background in, I suppose, English and legal subjects, etc., etc., etc. And as a result, now, perhaps more than ever, there are a lot of qualified Charedim entering the workplace. I think the figures are, there are 50% of Charedim who in the long term go into work. Men, I think it's 71% women. I think the Israeli average is 81% women and 90-something men. So it's definitely, it's only half, but I think that's even a radical change. And maybe just a bit of historical background as to how this all occurred. Because there's actually not a strong religious precedent for an entire body of an entire community to spend their time learning. In fact, there's a lot of dispute if it's at all permissible to even receive funds to stay learning. But what happened was, in the post-Holocaust era, there was a leader in Israel, known as the Chazon Ish, Avraham Charedi, that felt that the Torah world had been decimated by the Holocaust, and that they needed to be rebuilt. So his policy in guiding the generation was, right now there's no luxury of whether learning is suited for you or not. There's the large body of the Jewish people are not engaged in study of Torah, they are engaged in gainful employment. So you guys have to kind of take on the banner and you have to regenerate Torah learning. So that was, I think, a very relevant point when there were a handful of yeshiva students. In 2019, I don't think that stands much longer, and I think the current within the Charedi world now is veering further and further, even in the staunch Lithuanian world, towards studying yeshiva, doing some kind of preparation for those people who are not geared to stay in long-term learning, which means they don't have the potential to become scholars, or the secular equivalent would be entering into the academia, and do these crossover degrees and kind of get employed. So that's one thing. Now, in terms of the poverty, I think the poverty is got two components to it. I think there are Charedi families that are poor because they don't have qualifications, and therefore the breadwinner, who is often the man, just can't make enough money to support a large family. But there's actually it's a conscious choice, that they actually, and I think this is important to also, I think, to appreciate, the values of the society at large are not materialistic values. So the standard of living, there's almost no material competition. No one's trying to, certainly within the community that I've experienced in living, there's no sense of one-upmanship in terms of I have to spend money that I don't have to impress people I don't like. There's none of that. So it's a very non-materialistic society. So a person who has an option of being, according to the classic definition of poverty, which of course is subjective as what is called poverty, I think beneath the starvation line is certainly poverty, but beyond that, does not having a car or whatever, does that define poverty? So there are certain families that make a deliberate choice to live on the meager income from their quail stipend and the salary that the wife may make, and actually say, we'll give up the comforts of a higher standard of living because we actually devoted to the ideal of the study of Torah. So there are those, and I see those surrounding me, where it's a very kind of pure intention. And there are, of course, those who just would love to make more money, but they unfortunately don't have the qualifications. But all that's changing. Just a personal anecdote, I have a son, my eldest son, who isn't, really geared for full-time yeshiva study, and it was frustrating him. So within the Charedi system, there's now a lot of these yeshivas burgeoning, where they spend the entire afternoon devoted to the Israeli equivalent of what HSCs, matric. So he's doing a bagrut within the Charedi system. All his teachers are Charedi. His maths teacher's Charedi. His science teacher's Charedi. His history teacher's Charedi. His physical education teacher's Charedi. His life skills teacher's Charedi. So there is actually, it's opening up a lot, and I think that's not what it was a couple of decades ago.
So, to go back to I suppose to put the two questions together now, within a community that has such a high value on excellence within Torah study, so what it leaves is not so many people can become excellent scholars. That's the reality. Which leaves many people disenfranchised within a system that they cannot. So you spoke of your son, but I imagine there are a lot more who not only not capable of study, but don't enjoy the study. And anyone who spends any time in Israel will see many Charedi kids not in yeshiva, walking the streets, futzing around. And you have the situation that many people who just don't fit the mold, either because academically they don't have the ability or they don't have the desire, but yet the stigma that would be within the community were they to serve in the army, were they to go seek a secular education, leaves this sort of group of individuals, and I don't know, what the numbers are, other than it's a visible, let's call it visible minority of individuals who, if they were to serve in the army, and we have unfortunately seen that those within the Charedi community who do serve in the army often shunned, or what's the term, chaydak, is it the chardak, which is a pejorative term used towards Charedi in the army, or the ability that, even though we've had individuals from the Charedi community in our community who said, they are studying, they're studying courses, university, but they can't let their neighbors know that they're studying, because if it gets out that they are not dedicating their life totally to Torah, the social cost. So I agree with you that the Charedi community is in no way materialistically, there's no material one-upmanship, but there's definitely a one-upmanship and definitely social pressures to conform, albeit it's not on a material level, but it's on a different level, on a spiritual level, let's call it. But I don't know if there's a question in there, but perhaps a comment on those phenomena. What do we do with those people within our community who don't conform to our standards?
That's a great one. So I think that definitely is something which needs to be reckoned with. I think also it's a kind of this very difficult dance that you have to play, because there's look, first of all, I think the mood is changing. I think traditionally a person that joined the army probably would not be looked upon. I think there's degrees. The actual term chadak, I've never actually colloquially heard that. I've only seen it on these posters. And in Israel, the rule is that never trust a poster. But
people might not be familiar with the posters, maybe explain it more.
So there's the way that a lot of the communication happens in Israel are these big posters plastered onto these massive notice boards. and they kind of proclaim certain ideals. So there are these like horrible cartoons drawn of what they call Charedi, which is a Charedi soldier. Generally those posters are, if someone's putting up a poster, it means they've got an issue and they're not representative. It's just a very loud minority. And I also think the attitude is actually interesting. The attitude towards kids going to the army will obviously differ between what community you come from. So if you're a Satmar, you know, if you're from Ashorim, which is a kind of very extreme, as Rabbi Krebs commented, that Satmar are the one group which are actually openly anti-Zionist. They don't engage in anything with the state, they don't accept money from the state, they don't even go to the Kotel because it was conquered, it wasn't part of the initial UN partition plan. So they're an extreme sect, they're a minority, but I would imagine if one of their followers would go into the army, they would create a lot of negative kind of rebound. Within the larger community, it is, I mean, there's probably still a lot of that, just in terms of the army reaction, but there's a lot of actual, now, not only tolerance, but acceptance. There's a lot of Charedi units in the army which are starting to open up. I have two students, one who joined a paratrooper unit, Charedi paratrooper unit, another one who joined Kirati, an infantry unit. So the Charedi, there's the old unit, which is Netzach Yehuda, which is a counter-terrorist unit. So there's actually a lot of Charedi units in the army, and in fact, they're oversubscribed. There's more Charedi that want to go into the army than actually want to, that they can facilitate because of their, let's say, the kashrut, etc., which is quite infrastructurally hard to manage. But definitely so that's the one instance. In other words, I think it depends on the community in terms of the backlash. In terms of people not finding themselves in the system, that I think is a problem in the Charedi world. I think it's a global problem. I think schools are suffering across the board, and it's a difficult problem to deal with. Within the Charedi world, maybe it's exacerbated because you don't want to, as it were, compromise the ultimate value and then open up the doors, because there's a kind of sense of you want to, and this becomes like arguable if this is the right or wrong approach, but let's say the approach is that if you, I'll give you an anecdote which perhaps will illustrate it. There's a school called Marava. It was the first of its kind, and it was actually a Charedi school devoted towards a balance between Torah and secular studies. And before it was opened, the leader of the yeshiva world at the time was a person called Reb Elazar Menachem Shach, Rav Shach as he's known as, and the person who opened up the school, a person called Baruch Chait, went to Rav Shach and he said, should I open up the school? And Rav Shach says, no question, it's a necessity, you have to open it up. But he said, no, that I will publicly condemn the school. That's a very difficult thing to understand. If you're going to open up the school, and I'm telling you to open up, why will I condemn it? So the answer is that there needs to be perhaps, there's perhaps a suspicion or an awareness that the secular world is a very tempting world. And for an immature student, full exposure may actually cause him to be destabilized and lose a certain element of what they could potentially gain in their long-term education. So therefore, there's kind of everyone has to err on the side of caution. So erring on the side of caution by creating a system which actually caters to a particular kind of person, which I suppose all schools do, but when you don't fit into the system, what do we do? So there's a reluctance to change the system. And I think there's actually in a historic changeover, because that's already starting to change. There are more and more schools opening up which are offering secular options, but as of today, I think that's still probably the major thrust, that if we open up the system, even though ideally we think for individuals for sure it's better, but the minute it becomes a public proclamation, so then that may undermine the whole system. In other words, it's a strategy, for better or for worse.
So just, I suppose, 2 points, I don't know if there are questions in there, but the concept where, I suppose you presented within the Charedi world that Torah study is the top and there's nothing that comes close to it. But I suppose in all areas of life is that Talmud Torah, study of Torah is forfeited for doing mitzvot, for doing acts of kindness and the like. and earning a living and the like. So there are definitely times where the study of Torah needs to be somewhat minimalized or somewhat supplemented with other areas that's actively participating within the world. So if we were to look at the world, and granted this is now a world I suppose that I come from, and so I have a vested interest to some degree in this question, is the ability to combine, whether it be some form of national contribution with the Talmud study. That I'd like to think that within the world that I come from as well, Talmud Torah, is the epitome, and there's nothing that comes close to it. But I suppose for my rabbanim, the idea being that serving in the army is the greatest chesed, the greatest kindness that one can do. In the same way as that we need to go visit the sick, in the same way as we have to go pay a shiva call, a mourner's call, and we have to do all forms of kindness, the serving in the army would be something similar along those. Not that, so the world I come from isn't one that says you leave the yeshiva world completely to go serve in the army, but rather understanding that it is part of the religious experience. And similarly, I suppose the idea of a secular education being on the one extent either a necessary evil in order to be able to create, to be able to provide for yourself and your family, even on a minimalistic level, or alternatively as an end to be able to have certain material benefits, but that one doesn't have to pick that it is either or, but that there is some level of combination to be able to combine within the world, that one doesn't have to look at it as, excuse the pun, but black and white, but there are multiple shades of ways of combining values that are core to Judaism with other values that are no less core to Judaism.
Right. So I think that's true. I think that gets kind of the nitty-gritty of, like you said, that when you have a mitzvah which can't be performed by someone else, then you have to get up and do it. So the question is, well, I think there's kind of the halachic reality, and then there's a practical reality. Does the army lack resources? Does it lack soldiers? If the answer to that question would be no, so then if a person's learning, well, why would he stop? If he's not learning, so then definitely he should go. But if he is learning, why should he stop? I think there's another kind of underlying social, historical factor, which I think it makes it complicated. I think the Israeli army, as much as it's a protective force for Israel, it's also looked upon as a melting pot, where at a very formative age, children are exposed, or the soldiers are exposed to a very strong ideal of how to think. And I think there's a large reticence on behalf of the Charedi community in terms of that ideological perspective. That, it's not that I'm sending my kids into an army and their commanders are going to be like these paragons of Jewish values, but they may not be. And that's why I think integrating the Charedim into the army is, for the army, an extremely complex thing, because they just have different requirements, but they can't, in a way. I once heard a joke. It's that all the Charedim, everyone says, Charedim don't want to go to the army, and all the secular people say, we want the Charedim in the army. He says, in truth, the Charedim want to go to the army, and the secular people say, we don't want you there. I mean, for the Israeli army, imagine if the whole thing became film, it would be. So I think there's the fear. They're going to the army. It's not only that I'll be serving people in a way it may knock me out. It may knock me out of my spiritual perspective. And I think, in the modern Orthodox world, that's a very real fear. And there's a lot of efforts made to make sure that it doesn't happen, because it can so easily happen. I recently had Shabbos with a cousin of mine who was in an elite unit called Charedi, which is like the other guys the dream is a pelican. So they drop them in and they save people from helicopters. And he said he went from the army back to studying yeshiva. He said it took him, and he's an extremely, strong person, but he said it was 6 months before he could even feel that he was davening. And I think, unfortunately, there's a high incidence of people who go into the army and they lose their connection to Torah. Now, is that good or bad? You can argue, well, if they lost, or wasn't there, it's strong enough to begin with or not. I agree with you, but that is definitely a fear, which I think the Charedi world is conscious of. It's not like they're sending it to a Charedi army, they're sending it to a secular army. You know, so I think that's a fear.
And I have to echo that, because granted that I had a very limited service in the army, but even in my limited service within the army, the base is a very difficult place to be a from individual, even with the allowances for times to daven and kosher food and the like. Just the environment is not an easy environment. It's easier to be from in Sydney than it is to be in the army. There's no question. But that being said, I wasn't in a religious unit, but there's those challenges. I'm not going to ask. I had one more question, but I'm actually going to leave my question because I can ask it on another basis. But I will open it up to the audience if there are some questions from the audience. You agreeable to take the questions?
Great.
Okay. So, any questions from the audience? I know there are questions from the audience, so who's going to be the first one to ask? I'm just going to come bring it. There are people watching online that won't hear you.
Hi. I just want to ask, not really anything we discussed this evening, but in relation to the movie that we watched last week on Charedi.
What was the movie?
What was it called?
Stiesel?
No.
It was a documentary.
The documentary on Masharim primarily. And they spoke about the influence of the internet and of television, and a lot of the Charedian family don't have television, or most of them actually don't have television, and none of them, very few, have internet. The is becoming a problem, and they're talking about introducing a kosher internet and all the rest. So I just was interested in your perspective on that.
That's actually a great thing we shouldn't discuss. So, yeah, TVs are like, just don't, there's no TVs. What about computers? So actually computers are like, it's a massive struggle in the Charedi world how to deal with technology. On the one hand, it's kind of something you can't live with it and you can't live without it. Right now, the major approach is, for sure, kids, no kids will have smartphones. There is actually a stigma to having a smartphone. If a kid has a smartphone, it will cause stigma. There's kind of a lot of pushback against stay away from technology. Technology is dangerous. Don't even touch it. Anecdotally, I even had a time, because I have this monstrosity in my pocket. So I've had a time where someone asked me, "Can you borrow a phone?" And I've said to him, "You won't touch it. You won't even touch it." He says, "No, that's impure. I'm not going to go near it." So I hit him. Which is interesting. So amongst the kids, they all have dumb phones. Their phones have dumb phones, which means it's like your normal Nokia brick. Which in a way, you know, just from my own anecdotal experience, for me I find that amazing. Because my kids don't know what a screen is. As they get older, and my daughters, when they're studying, so then they have to use computers, and they get into computers, but generally in their adolescent years, they're pretty much tech-free. And I think that's an amazing thing, because my little 7-year-old, she spends the time playing with her friends, playing imaginary games, and they go skipping. So I think it's wonderful. I think it's a much more wholesome way of growing up. Now, in terms of technology, so here you've got my phone. It looks like your standard Samsung Galaxy. Actually, if I switch it on, there's a hechsher on it. It's a kosher phone. Now, obviously it's pushing the lines of kashrus with its science and that, but my phone, I only use it for WhatsApp and Gmail. So it's got a block browser, which is kind of borderline acceptable in the Charedi world. I don't feel embarrassed taking it out, but other people may well be. So there's a lot of kind of fear. There's a lot of fear about technology, and the reason why there's so much fear is because I think there's two parts of the fear. The fear is that the internet is for sure for a child, but even for an adult, is a dangerous place to be because of the exposure to easy access to pornography, and in terms of the impression that they can make on a young soul, it's quite horrific. So that's the one thing. The other thing is perhaps children who have not been educated in a broad education, and then all of a sudden they're exposed to everything, that can be immensely destabilizing. So they have to kind of be coached into that. So as a result, there's very little, for example, we subscribe to there is in Israel kosher internet providers, whereby the filter is not even, it's not on the PC, it's actually the server will only let you access to a certain amount of things, and certain sites completely blocked. We have a computer at home, but we have a code in our computer. The kids aren't allowed free access to the computer. And ironically, I have 2 married daughters, and neither of them will have a computer in the home. So when they want to use a tray thing, they come to the parents. So yeah, that's an interesting thing.
But yet you said you watch Shtisel, so or you have.
Oh, so actually, the reason I watch Shtisel is because everyone's been talking about it, and I thought I'm going to seem like a real idiot if everyone's saying. But in Shtisel, so last night, between 11 and 12, myself, my mother, and my father sat there and watched Shtisel, and I had such mixed reactions because on one hand I felt this is Fiddler on the Roof all over again, because there was a lot of kind of which I felt a parody. But there was a lot of stuff which they got right. So I've got mixed reactions to watch Shtisel.
Question?
Don't be scared. Don't be scared.
I've sort of had problems with what I see as Charedi not following what seems fairly clear to me in the Torah. For example, the Israelites had to do the fighting. They had to be in the army. The tribes who wanted to go off and hang around with their sheep were only allowed to do so if they continued fighting until the land had been conquered. So the Jewish tradition from right back in the Torah is that people do have to do their bit for the collective defense of the nation. And yet, the Charedi sit and study all this, but they don't appear to be following it in not being willing to fight for the nation, accepting that Israel is now the only Jewish nation that does exist, that whether or not God has created it in a miraculous way, Israel is now there and it is the only Jewish nation, and to preserve the Jewish nation, all Jews should be contributing, and the contribution of Jews living in Israel should be to fight in the army.
So I think that's interesting because, I think you're right. If you read even if you read the simple text, when Moshe says you should go to the army, it's actually only a selected part of the Jewish people that actually go out and fight. And the Medrash comments that there were actually 3 camps of people who were conscripted to the army. The first camp were the fighters, the next camp were the learners, and the third camp were the daveners. So even historically in the Jewish people, it wasn't everyone that offered the opportunity to the army, it was actually the select few. How they actually, figured out who should go and who shouldn't go is I'm not quite sure. But there definitely was no stage where every able man, woman, and child. Just as an example, the Torah explicitly exempts a man who's in the first year of marriage from not only going into the army, but in doing any community service. A man who's just built a house, planted a vineyard. And a man who's scared. So there's enormous ways of kind of getting exemptions from the army, even in the Torah and even historically. So I just don't think it was never a real part of the Jewish people that every single person should go to the army.
Another one is Ein Kamach Ein Torah. Again, same thing applies. You don't get the Kamach without doing something for it. So
yeah.
That means that rather than expecting the sustenance to come from the other taxpayers in Israel, the people should be working to support themselves.
Okay, so glad you quoted that. It's quite interesting. The Im Ein Kemach and Ein Torah. There's also Im Ein Torah and Kemach. So it actually goes both ways. So I definitely think that there should be more Charedim working, and there should be more secular people in yeshivas. There's actually an organization. It's called Kemach, which encourages Charedi entrance into the workplace. There's the Rambam actually rules. There's two interesting Rambams which often raises a contradiction. There's a Rambam in the laws of the study of Torah where he says a person it's illegal, it's halachically invalid for a person to accept money for the study of Torah. And then there's a Rambam at the end of the laws of Shemitah and Yovel where he says historically there were 12 tribes. Of those 12 tribes there was a tribe of Levi. The tribe of Levi never worked, never went into the army, they sit and studied all day. And it was the obligation of the rest of the Jewish people to support them through their tithing and etc. And the Rambam says that principle of the tribe of Levi being selected as the few that would sit aside and learn, so that is not only true of the tribe of Levi, but any human being that of his own volition decides that he would like to go and devote his life to the study of Torah, the service of God, in order to gain that wisdom and insight, it is his right and privilege to do so, and he will be supplied with his sustenance by Hashem himself. So even according to the halachic ruling, if you do get this purely motivated individual, he's fully entitled to study, and actually historically was always so.
Hi. I want you just to comment on those people who are, Rabbi, you talked a little bit earlier about those who are feeling disenfranchised or feel they're not part of the Charedi community. Should those people who choose to leave, could you just comment on that, on how the Charedi community...
Yeah, so I can't guarantee how each individual family deals with that, because as you can imagine, it's like pretty traumatic. I deal with it the other way around. I deal with the people who, their parents were secular and they become from, and their parents are... there's a story about two old men that were sitting on the bench, and Abi says to Jaime, so Jaime, why'd you look so sad? He says, it's happened again. He says, what? He says, another one of my sons has become from. He says, you've got to check your missuses. So what do you do with it? So you can imagine that, I was once having a meeting with parents of a student of mine, and the father wasn't Jewish, the mother was Jewish. And I was kind of comforting them. They were very, very, very opposed to their son's entrance into religion. And they said, I said to him, he's living a life, it's moral. He may not be doing what you anticipate he'd do, but he's really kind of entering into a very wholesome and productive life. And his mother looked me in the eye and she said, would you feel the same way if your child became a Buddhist? And that was a really horrible question. It was very poignant, but it was a horrible thing to think about. So you can imagine if you, so you can relate to the fact that you've got certain values that you want your children to embody. What happens when they absolutely reject them? I think that's a question that every parent has to deal with. And there's different ways of approach, but just to put across that that's an emotionally very difficult thing to deal with. So often how people respond, it's not the way they should respond. What way should they respond? So in Bnei Brak, there's a yeshiva called Ponevet, which is it's probably like one of the most elite of the elite yeshivas in Israel. And the Rosh Yeshiva is a person called Rabbi Gershon Edelstein. I saw an interview, you can actually check it up on YouTube, where a person asked him, what should you do if your son, who's religious, comes home and he's secular with his girlfriend? How should you respond? So he said, you have to embrace them, be kind to them. The person, should you push them away? He said, Chas v'shalom, God forbid. He said, but they're doing something which is a serious sin. They're living together before they're married. He said, Chas v'shalom, embrace them with love. They asked him a further question, what happens if you're walking in your religious neighborhood with your son and he's not following your ways? And whilst walking down the street, he lights up a cigarette on Shabbos. What should you do? Should you say to him, please don't smoke, this is a public, don't embarrass me? He says, Chas v'shalom. You don't do that. He says, if you do that, it's like creating a stumbling block in front of a blind person. It means you're tripping him up. You're putting him into a situation. So the correct way would be for a person disenfranchised to embrace them and allow people to choose the way they want to live their life. Practically speaking, that's an emotionally very difficult thing to deal with. It's confronting for the family, and it's definitely confronting for whenever a child breaks with the social norm, it's a very difficult thing for the society, for the family, for the child. So this is I suppose, intensified in the Charedi world. anecdotally, you know, I've got friends whose children are not, either they're not religious or they're different kinds of religious, and the reality is that children have freedom of choice like we all do, and everyone's going to choose their own way, and we as parents have an obligation to give them unconditional love, and we as a society have an obligation to give them unconditional love. Do we live up to ourselves? Unfortunately, sometimes not. And that's very sad for everyone.
And one more question? No? All right.
Okay.
All right, so. All right, thank you, Rabbi Siegel, and thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I think it was very insightful and very enlightening. I'm sure you want to stick around for a few minutes afterwards if anyone has some personal questions to ask you. I think one of the nice things, so Rabbi Siegel does, so a lot of my good friends went through Rabbi Siegel's yeshiva. I myself sort of never made it there myself. But one of the things that is beautiful within the religious world, and I'd like to think, is that you can have people of different stripes that see each other as part of very much the same journey. That I don't wear black hats, and you know, I don't necessarily wear a tie and light. But Rabbi Siegel and myself would very much see ourselves as part of the same community. That within Orthodox Judaism, that God is one, that God gave us the Torah, and God has expectations that we live a moral life according to Torah and mitzvot. It's something that we share. And it's something that often people would look at us and say, oh, well, Rabbi Siegel is much more orthodox than me, or I'm much more modern, or much more less orthodox. And I think from both of our point of view, our ideal is that we both are committed Jews. We have different ways of approaching Judaism. We have different, ways of looking at the same thing. But the idea and the ideal that Torah, mitzvot, and Hashem's mitzvahs are the crux and core of our value system, I'd like to think that we share that in its entirety. So it's been an absolute privilege to host you once again in a slightly different forum. Thank you very much. Please God, our next talk will be happening in April, and that will be with a speaker named Munza Emad. And that is going to be a story from Gaza about a young man who grew up in Gaza, lives in Sydney, but his entire family is still in Gaza, and has been very instrumental in working in trying to bring the Israelis and Palestinians together, both over here as well as over there. So that will be happening in April. It's gone from one extreme to a completely different extreme. But thank you so much for joining us, and have a good night.